Human beings begin existence in wonder. We awaken to a vast universe of power and delight, of beauty and terror. More so than for any of the other 10 million species of life on planet Earth, for humans, wonder is at the very core of our being. It's the source of all religion, all philosophy, all the arts and sciences. And how we respond to wonder and how we cultivate it determine the sort of people we are. We've been at this task of exploring wonder for a long time, possibly as long as 300,000 years, and certainly for the last 20,000 years. Humans have been gathering in the night and celebrating the wonder of existence. No matter what continent humans lived on, no matter what culture, no matter what era, they gathered in the night around the fire of the African plains, in the caves of the Eurasian forest, and under the brilliant night sky of the Australian continent. There they gathered and told the sacred stories of the universe. In all these traditions encircling the planet, there seems to have been a common response to the pervasive sense of wonder. That was to strive consciously to integrate humans with the entire cosmological process. The universe was felt to be a numinous reality, and the desire on the part of the very earliest humans was to participate in it. They seemed to be deeply convinced that the ultimate fulfillment for a human being was an intimate involvement with the stupendous powers that pervade the world. I say that every culture did this, but that's not quite true. Modern industrial society is set up differently. Questions of ultimate meaning are dealt with not in the caves or in open plains, but in the churches, or the mosques, or the temples. Here each weekend, billions of humans gather to reflect on their relationship with the divine. In all these millions of weekly ceremonies, so essential to the health and spirituality of humanity as a whole, one will find a diversity of religious celebrations, but almost never will one find any serious contemplation of the universe. By universe, I mean simply the universe of stars, topsoil, amphibians, mammals, insects, wetlands. Contemporary religion has come to focus primarily on the relationships of humans with each other and with the divine. They've pushed aside the ancient questions of how we are to relate to the wonder of the universe. This is such a strange situation. Why wouldn't our religion say something about the universe? This is not to question in any way the importance of what they focus on. But why would religious focus just on the human relationships or the human-divine relationships and leave out the cosmos? Science, on the other hand, fails in a different way. Even though science discovers all kinds of truths about the universe, science has little or nothing to say about the role of the human in the universe. You can study chemistry and biology and physics in all the great universities of our time, and you'll never focus on questions such as, what is the role of the human in the universe? Both religion and science refuse to confront this basic question. What happened was that medieval culture in which science and religion worked in harmony split apart 4 centuries ago. The modern scientific endeavor destroyed humanity's medieval understanding of the universe. In 1543, Nicholas Copernicus, this obscure Polish astronomer, announced that it was the sun, not the earth, that was the very center of the world. Copernicus, more than anyone else, was aware of how dangerous his research was. He was a canon of the church, and he refused to publish his findings until he was on his very deathbed. What he feared would happen did indeed take place. The scientific content of his research was accepted, and the cosmological orientation of the entire medieval world was slowly but decisively rejected. The modern world, based on a split between science and religion, was firmly established. From then on, religion came to be understood primarily as a repository of moral truths concerning the behavior necessary to get to heaven. Science, on the other hand, came to be regarded as the method for discovering the truth of the universe. But it was a universe no longer considered to be sacred. Throughout the scientific period, the universe became just matter, a secular universe. We've been conditioned to regard this split between science and religion as a good thing. And there are good things about such a split. But there's been at least one deadly consequence. We no longer initiate our younger people into their role in the universe. Really, we don't even know what to tell them. The whole cosmological tradition is shriveled up after 20,000 years. Our science teaches the facts of the universe, but it does not teach a way of life. To do so would be to violate modern science's dictum that all value judgments must be avoided. Religion, on the other hand, teaches values, but values that focus exclusively on the human-human relationships and the human-divine relationship. So we grow up without any real education on how to live with respect to the cosmological processes. And it's because of this ignorance that we became the generation that ended up destroying so much of the earth. But if humans have been gathering in the night for 20,000 years in order to reflect upon the universe and their role in the universe, they will continue this activity in one form or another. If medieval Europe lost its cosmological orientation, then something else will take its place. Cosmology always happens, either consciously or unconsciously. In order to discover what has taken the place of authentic cosmology, one needs to ask just two questions. First, where are the caves in which we gather every night? And second, who in the cave explains the meaning of the universe? Because that's cosmology. Gather together and learn the meaning of the universe. For us, the answers are clear. We gather every night in the TV room, and we learn the meaning of life from the advertisements. Before an American child enters grade school, before entering any science class or entering into any real way into society's various religious ceremonies, an American child will have soaked in 30,000 advertisements. Our teenagers spend more time absorbing ads than going to school. All of this is old news, and none of us feels any good about it. But for the most part, we just ignore it. It's background. It's just there, part of what's going on. We learned to accept it so long ago, we hardly even think about it anymore. We've come to regard the ad maybe as an annoyance, but it's this neutral thing. In reality, every ad is a cosmological sermon. The cosmology behind the ad is the same everywhere. The universe is a collection of objects to be fashioned into commodities for human consumption. That's an entire cosmology, sold worldwide 5 billion times a day. And think of how effective it has been. These sermons going on every night in these modern caves, using some movie stars, our athletes, our best artists. After a million ads, even the most gifted child will have accepted as true the cosmological worldview of the advertiser. The meaning of existence? To work at jobs, to earn money, to buy stuff. What could be simpler? The role of the human in the universe? To obtain merchandise. And the image of the exalted human is also deeply set in their minds. Forget Jesus and Socrates and Rachel Carson and all their struggles and sufferings. The ideal people are carefree, wearing the right clothes, driving the right cars. That's the pinnacle of human existence. If you stop a moment and think of all the planet's children absorbing 10,000 of these sermons each year of their lives, it's easy to understand how consumerism became the dominant world faith of our time. But this fact remains invisible to us. We don't even think of consumerism as a cosmological faith. Why? Because we take the ad's worldview as being true. That's how effective our advertising is. The painful truth, so painful few of us are ready to absorb it, is this. When we place our children in the world of television, we place them in the care of the planet's most sophisticated religious preachers. The pressing task of our time is the integration of our lives with the life of the planet. We need to be realistic about the magnitude of this challenge. All of us have been conditioned for years and even decades into regarding the universe as a collection of objects to be shaped into consumer items. So any basic change of orientation is going to be difficult, and a full transformation certainly requires years of effort and involves the deepest regions of the human psyche. With a challenge so vast, there are any number of ways of approach. Here I'd like to begin simply by considering a new cosmological relationship with the sun, one which appropriates what we have learned over the last 400 years of scientific study. If we begin very simply, we think of the sun as this hot thing up in the sky that travels around the earth We see it rise, we watch it set. We can't tell how big it is, but it doesn't seem to be that big because we can block it out entirely with our hand. The earth, in contrast, is the whole world. It's a place of great oceans and tidal waves, of vast mountain ranges and hurricanes. The greatness of Nicholas Copernicus is that with his book, he provided a process by which the most advanced thinkers of Europe could come to grasp a new, subtle, disturbing, and amazing truth. The sun resides at the center of the solar system, while the Earth and Mars and Jupiter and all the planets circle it. No wonder the culture split apart. The religion and all the understanding of morality and virtue were tied to the view that Earth was the center of the world. This new revelation coming from science was just too startling. It was too radical to be absorbed into the medieval worldview. It seems inevitable from our standpoint that culture would crack apart. The challenge today is to integrate the human with the cosmological, not by rejecting Copernicus and retreating to a former worldview, but by completing Copernicus and entering a new one. We have lots of scientific knowledge, but abstract scientific knowledge alone is not enough. What's needed is a transformation of a person's entire being. What's needed is to know that the Earth travels around the sun in the sense of a living planet, but feeling this traveling around the sun. Then it's not simply abstract knowledge. Then it's knowledge that enables us to enter the solar system. Any person can now experience in a direct way the Earth rotating and revolving around the sun. The simplest way to accomplish this is to go out half an hour before sunset at a time when Venus is low on the horizon. It's helpful if another planet is also visible, such as Mars, but that's not necessary. The important thing is this actual experience. If you do not experience the universe directly, it doesn't matter at all what you believe about it. One begins by focusing attention on Venus and keeping the model of the solar system in mind as a way of deepening the experience. So either by speaking aloud or by reviewing the situation in your mind, rehearse the basic facts. Venus is 65 million miles away from the sun, about a third of the way closer to the sun than the Earth, which is 93 million miles away. And there below Venus is Mars, 130 million miles away. All three move in a single plane around the sun. The actual numbers are not even necessary here. What needs to be kept in mind is a simple fact that we're dealing with these great distances, and that concerning these three planets, Venus is closest, then Earth, and then Mars, and all three move in a plane around the sun. With the model of the solar system in mind, and ordering your experience, there comes a moment when you enter into the solar system all at once. You feel in an experiential, imaginative, and direct way the Earth slowly turning away from the sun. And you have a sense in which the plane and the planets move about. Even a beginning recognition of the great distance to Venus. You will also feel, and possibly for the very first time in your life, the immensity of Earth as it rolls away from the great sun. This is an amazing experience, and it happens in a flash. A single surprising shudder passes through you, and you realize you're standing on the back of something like a whale, one that is slowly rotating its great bulk on the surface of an unseen ocean. It's true that soon afterwards, you might snap back into your everyday way in the world, but if even for a moment you can enter into this larger relationship, you'll be able to enter it again more easily in the future. The primary gateways are dawn and dusk. These are the easiest moments to enter. If you open yourself to them, then twice each day, you will become the living planet encircling a star. To learn to be where you are is the very first step in the task of consciously entering the universe. And as you grow in competence, you'll learn to experience yourself on the whirling Earth amidst the enveloping solar system at any time and at any place. Here's the next step into a deeper relationship with the sun. Though the sun appears to be just a small disk in the sky, it is in reality 1,000,000 times larger than Earth. Thus, as you get a sense of the Earth's immensity as it rotates in space, and you know the sun there on the horizon is a size that could contain 1,000,000 Earths, you can begin to feel the way in which the massiveness of the sun whips the Earth and all the planets through their arcs. The crucial step here is to awaken to the fact of the sun's gravitational power. The Earth is one immense planet, and yet it is being whipped around the sun by the power of the sun. This is something the sun is doing in every instant of every day. We're held by the sun. If the sun released us from its bond, we would sail off into deep space. To feel yourself whipped around the sun is to become one of a very small number of humans today who actually live in the solar system. Most of us do not live consciously on the Earth, this Earth that rotates and revolves around the sun. We live rather in an illusion that regards the Earth as a fixed place, where the ground is always solid and unmoving. Somehow it's resting on a great slab of cement. But to contemplate the solar system until you feel the great Earth turning away from the sun, actually feel it in your bones, and then to feel this immense planet being swung around its cosmic partner, this is to take a crucial step into inhabiting the actual universe and solar system and Earth. It is to discover yourself and your world as soaring around a star that floats in the vast ocean of the cosmos. It's important here not to confuse science and cosmology. Science aims at an understanding of the Earth's rotational and revolutionary movements around the sun. Cosmology, on the other hand, aims at embedding a human being in a conscious participation with these dynamics of the universe. As humans have experienced for millennia, cosmology evokes a deep zest for life, a zest that is revivifying, for it provides the joy necessary to begin each day with a great energy. This cosmological practice of entering the universe is a culture's way for enabling a person to taste the ecstasy at the root of existence. To discover your bonded relationship with the sun, this blazing star, is to touch into an ocean of wonder. And you can accomplish great things if you begin each day charged with such wonder and amazement. Thus, the traditional cosmological enterprise is the opposite of consumerism. Cosmology sells no material objects, but rather offers a deepening of consciousness, enabling one to enter into a felt participation with the creativity of the universe. And this is profoundly satisfying. Consumerism, on the other hand, is consciously designed to leave us frustrated, because if we end frustrated, we will always be left wanting yet another object. Cosmology evokes ecstasies that lead to deep satisfaction. Consumerism evokes greed that leads to a perpetual lack of fulfillment. The primary inadequacy of contemporary culture is our lack of any way to introduce our young to a consciously felt participation with these powers of the universe. And without such a participation, we leave children with this deep sense of loneliness. Our cultural situation in this regard is dire indeed. It is quite possible that in terms of techniques for making contact with the primordial realities, we industrial peoples are the most deprived of all history. Humans are born out of these cosmological processes. It's only natural we'd feel this deep yearning to move with and to be in relationship to these powers of wind and sun, of forest and river and starlight. If 20,000 years of human development is any guide, it's a very simple choice. We need to put our energy into initiating our young into an ecstatic involvement with the universe. If we refuse to devote ourselves to such work, we will just have to make the necessary adjustments to deal with this ongoing destruction of the earth that follows from consumerism. A third step in entering a new cosmological relationship with our sun begins with the fact that we have mentioned before. The Earth is the tiniest fraction, only a millionth the size of the sun. So the Earth and the other planets are just wisps silently sailing through space. The discovery I'd like to examine here has to do with energy. Using the detailed understanding of atomic and nuclear physics, which were both discovered in our century, we've learned something never even suspected by the greatest thinkers of all human history, including Copernicus himself, and Galileo, and Aristotle, and all the rest. Stars are composed of hydrogen, and in the star's center, hydrogen is pressed into atoms of helium in this process called stellar nucleosynthesis. Sunshine comes from the energy that is released in the very center of the sun. There, under the great pressures at the core, the sun's hydrogen is fused into helium, and in this process, energy in the form of light is released. What is surprising is how much energy the sun expends by this process. Each second, the sun transforms 4 million tons of itself into light. In each second, then, a huge chunk of the sun vanishes into radiant energy that soars in every direction. In our own experience, we've perhaps watched candles burn down. We've seen wood consumed by flames. But nothing in all of human experience compares to this blaze that engulfs oceans of matter every day. With each second, the sun gives itself over to become energy that we, with every meal, partake in. The sun converts itself into a flow of energy, and photosynthesis transforms this energy into plants that are then consumed by animals. So for 2 million years, humans have been feasting on the sun's energy, stored in the form of wheat or corn or reindeer. As each day the sun dies as sun and is reborn as the very vitality of the earth. Those solar flames that we marvel over, they are in fact the very power of the vast human enterprise. Every child of ours needs to learn the simple truth. She is the energy of the sun. And true human fulfillment is found in a face that shines with that same radiant joy. The sun's extravagant bestowal of energy is a manifestation of an underlying impulse pervading the universe. In the star, this impulse reveals itself as an ongoing giveaway of energy. In the human heart, it is felt as our urge to dedicate our lives to the well-being of the larger community. In a culture where cosmology is living, children are taught their roles by the sun and moon, by rainfall, by starlight and the salmon run. It's been so long since we've lived in such a world it seems completely foreign to us. But we can just now begin to imagine what it might be like for our children and for our children's children. They will wake up before dawn. They'll go out into the gray light. And while they are yawning away the last of their sleep, and as the earth slowly rotates back into that great cone of light from the sun, they will hear the story of the sun's gift, that they are able to stand there, that they're able to yawn, that they're able to think, because coursing through their bloodlines is the energy of the sun. If the sun were to stop its transformation of itself into light, the heat-giving molecules in every body would go cold. All of Earth's life would die as the temperature plummeted hundreds of degrees below zero. The entire biosphere would shrivel up into dust. The energy that courses through us is the energy of the sun. So to stand there at dawn and greet the sun is to complete a very ancient cycle. Atoms created at the beginning of time were brought together into stars. Then poured out the same primordial energy, some of which was then gathered up by the earth to swim in the oceans and to sing in the forests. We humans join this cosmic lineage when we accept the sun's gift of energy and transform it into creative action that enables others to flourish. If we burn brightly today, it is only because this same energy was burning brightly as the sun a month ago. Even as we take a single breath, our energy dissipates, and we need to be replenished all over again by the sun's gift of fire. If through the ages we have admired most those humans who have poured out their creative energies so that others might live, we were only intuitively recognizing that such humans were true to the nature of the energy that filled them. Human generosity is possible because at the center of the solar system, a magnificent stellar generosity pours forth free energy day and night, without stopping and without complaint and without the slightest hesitation. This is the way of the universe. This is the way of life. And this is the way in which each of us finds our own destiny. To greet the sun each morning in such a manner will be one of the fundamental practices of education in the 21st century. By contemplating the supreme example of the sun, we remind our children and ourselves of the possibilities of true greatness and true nobility of spirit. We excite in them and in us the energies necessary to reach their true fulfillment as humans. Such a transformation begins each morning and enables a person to live each day inside a very simple truth. A gorgeous living earth drifts light as a feather around the great roaring generosity of the sun. One of the most essential tasks of education is to communicate a sense of the whole. With a sense of the whole, which can also be called a cosmic sense, a person is able to see how all the strands of life are part of a greater fabric, and how the details of one's own life have a significance that reaches out to include one's community of life, and even the entire planet. The great opportunity for those of us alive here at the eve of the third millennium is to enter into new cosmological understanding of ourselves and the universe. We can experience ourselves and the whole universe in a radically new way, one based on the most startling discoveries of the scientific enterprise. Our primary obstacle in achieving this new sense of the whole universe is not any difficulty we might have with the discoveries themselves. These discoveries can be explained even to our children. Our central difficulty is experiencing the universe at all. We live our lives so encapsulated. We live within artificial worlds. When we stop to think about it, it's amazing to see how efficient we've been in sealing ourselves off from all contact with the universe. We go from asphalt to plastic to upholstery to linoleum to our cars. Living inside our artifacts, we forget the universe. Consider just the galaxies. A galaxy such as our Milky Way galaxy consists of 300 billion stars revolving around each other. We estimate that in addition to the Milky Way, there are something like 1 trillion galaxies in the known universe, and we've learned some truly amazing things about them. And yet, how many of us have any regular experience of the Milky Way or any other galaxy? In the next millennium, direct encounters with the Milky Way galaxy will be considered absolutely fundamental in the education of every human. It's so simple to accomplish. All that's needed is to journey out from under the urban pollution and lie on one's back and behold that path of milky light that runs from one horizon clear through the great vault of heavens all the way down to the opposite side of the world. This is the Milky Way galaxy, our home. As we lie on our backs beholding the great Milky Way, we can deepen this encounter via the discoveries of the 20th century. None of the billions of humans preceded us could know the Milky Way as we can tonight. When we contemplate the trail of milky light stretching across the sky, we now know this comes from the 300 billion stars of the Milky Way galaxy. In its three-dimensional form, the Milky Way is sometimes compared to a pancake that has a bulge in the center. But what's important here is that the Milky Way is not sitting on anything. It's gliding effortlessly through the dark universe, just as a manta ray soars through the ocean. This alone is an absolutely astounding fact, one discovered in our own century. If ancient peoples had discovered this, they would have been up all night long inventing music and telling stories in celebration. But after we discover it, it's put on library shelves. We don't even know how to live in such a universe. We on Earth are 2/3 the way out from the center of the Milky Way. We live on the inside of one of the long spiral arms. So our experience of the Milky Way naturally comes from inside the Milky Way. And we see stars in every direction because we live within a group of 300 billion stars. As you lie on your back, the Earth rotates so that every night you get to see a huge section of the Milky Way as it passes before your eyes. And when your line of sight is straight across the plane of the galaxy's body, you see many more stars, so many that their light commingles into that shimmering path. This Milky Path continues all around the sky, but we can't see it during the daylight because of the overpowering presence of the sun. But as you lie on your back imagining Earth within the body of the galaxy, knowing why the Milky Path stretches from one horizon clear across the sky to the opposite horizon and beyond, you can begin to experience the Earth as floating within this great body, the Milky Way. One of the greatest experiences a human can enjoy is floating on your back in some body of water at night. You look up and you can feel the Earth floating about the Milky Way. And the Milky Way too is floating in the great ocean that is the universe. The radical discoveries of modern science call for us to experiment with patterns of consciousness that have been set down in the primate line for 70 million years at least. As you lie on your back viewing the Milky Way, notice that an implicit assumption frames the experience. You feel as if you're looking up at the stars. This unconscious attitude is biologically rooted. Primates have had the up-down direction carefully coded into their organismic functioning. A chimpanzee awakening in the night in its nest in the trees needs to be instantly oriented by the up-down axis. Put another way, all those ancestral chimpanzees that needed more than a couple of seconds to figure out which way was up have long since met their demise by falling down. When you lie on your back beholding the Milky Way, see if you can imaginatively free yourself from 70 million years of biological conditioning regarding our place in the universe. This is an amazing opportunity, available so far as we can tell to only one species out of the 10 million in the Earth system. Thus, imagine the Earth floating in space. And instead of picturing your own place on the top part of the Earth, arrange the picture in your imagination so that you're on the bottom of this visualized Earth. Now as you lie there, imagine yourself peering down into the great chasm of the night sky. If you do this, the moment will come when all those stars will be experienced as down below you, far, far below you. The amazing feeling accompanying this experience is a sense of surprise that you're not falling down there to join them. But of course you don't fall. You hover in space, gazing down into the vault of stars, suspended there in your bond with Earth. Earth's gravity holds you, and you feel the strength of this gravitational bond in your body, which is pressed against the ground. We normally think of this pressure as coming from our weight, but in the strictly scientific sense, no body has intrinsic weight. Rather, all bodies are capable of entering into gravitational interaction. For us, the dominant gravitational interaction we experience is with the Earth. It's not intrinsic weight that keeps us here. For if the gravitational power of Earth and Sun were suddenly to vanish, we would, with ever-increasing velocity, soar away in a great rush down into that dark chasm of stars below us. It's not weight that keeps us here. Rather, we are held by the Earth. It's the Earth that keeps us suspended above the stars. As you lie there, feeling yourself hovering in this gravitational bond, peering down at the trillions of stars drifting in the infinite chasm of space, you will have entered an experience of the universe, not just from a human perspective or even a biological perspective. You will have entered an experience of the universe that comes from a galactic perspective. You will have become that part of the Milky Way galaxy that is experiencing what it is like to be the Milky Way galaxy. The next step in relating to the Milky Way is to learn to recognize the constellation Sagittarius. When you do, you will be gazing into the very center of the Milky Way galaxy, the hub around which all 300 billion stars revolve. To speak in terms of light, we are just under 30,000 light years from the center of the Milky Way galaxy. A light year is a measurement of distance. It's that distance that light will travel over a year's time, around 6 trillion miles. For instance, light from the center of the Milky Way galaxy, traveling at 186,000 miles each second, reaches us today after having streaked toward us for the last 30,000 years. So if tonight you direct your gaze towards Sagittarius, some of the photons of light that might reach you will have left the galactic center when giant woolly mammoths roamed the North American continent. Photons were created in those long ago moments when the Paleo-Indians revered and hunted these giant beasts. The saber-toothed tigers, like the Indians, also stalked the mammoths. And they would continue to hunt for another 20,000 years before disappearing in that awful event of extinction. In every instant of the saber-toothed tiger's existence, as generation after generation made its way hunting and mating and sleeping and stalking, in every instant, the photons from the center of the galaxy rifled silently toward us. It took that great volume of time for the photons rushing at light speed to reach us as we gaze into the Milky Way galaxy's center tonight. Besides the direction toward the center of the Milky Way, there's one more orientation we can consider, the Andromeda galaxy. If you direct your gaze toward the constellation, also called Andromeda, you'll see there a faint blur of light, unlike that of any of the stars. This represents the outer horizon of the naked human eye. Andromeda galaxy, slightly larger than our own Milky Way, comes to our eyes from 2.5 million light years away. Something happens in the soul of a person gazing at a blur of light while knowing this blur is a galaxy with hundreds of billions of stars. Something happens inside. A spaciousness opens up in psychic congruence with galactic spaciousness. That blur required millions of years to make it here, to an eye that now knows all of this. Aware of the larger dimensions of this experience, our inner world opens up as the light enters in. On Earth, 2.5 million years ago, humans were first discovering the use of tools, thereby entering into that long drama of seizing hold of the universe in a new way. On the day that these humans were shaping the first tools, light, as always, was exploding away from Andromeda. But that particular light had an extraordinary destiny. For as it roared away from Andromeda toward Milky Way, those inventive humans continued to develop their tools and their minds and their understanding until, after 2.5 million years of development, they discovered their place in space and time and could capture and wonder over those very photons of light that had left at the birth time of humanity. To gaze at Andromeda galaxy is to enter the spaciousness of a galaxy, but it is also to learn a new sense of time concerning the human venture. The human journey is as immense in time as Andromeda galaxy is distant in space. Andromeda and Milky Way are large galaxies that slowly pinwheel about each other. Each has a dozen or so galaxies that encircle them, called satellite galaxies. This whole system, consisting of the Milky Way, Andromeda, and all of their encircling galaxies, is spread out over 3.5 million light years, contains at least 500 billion stars, and is called by astronomers the local group. The local group. This local group of galaxies itself is but a satellite of a still vaster system. Just as planet Earth revolves around the sun, so too does our local group revolve around another central hub, the Virgo cluster. Virgo is a gigantic cluster, consisting of 1,000 galaxies, 53 million light years away. Our local group, along with hundreds of others, all revolve around this Virgo cluster at the center. When we reflect upon this entire supercluster system, upon its thousands and thousands of galaxies, each of which might contain 10 million intelligent planets, the primate mind begins to dissolve. We tremble at the vista, only because we never realized we were this immense. The educational efforts of the next century will include strengthening our self-identity until we can easily recognize that even this vast body of the universe is our own as well. If we can now bring ourselves to imagine this immense supercluster centered on the Virgo cluster as being just a single white dot, then the universe as a whole consists of 10 billion of these that are floating and drifting and twirling as blossoms do, when a gust of wind frees them from their branches and carries them aloft into the sky. Notice what we have so far. The Earth travels around the Sun. The Sun sails around the center of the Milky Way galaxy. The Milky Way and Andromeda, as well as their satellite galaxies, form one of the groups that travels around the Virgo cluster. But when we come to the Virgo supercluster, we discover something different. The superclusters are not moving around any other center. In fact, Edwin Hubble discovered something so startling that many physicists regard his discovery as the most significant of the 20th century. What he discovered is that when you look out at the superclusters of galaxies, you find the superclusters are all moving away from us. This is true whether we look at the clusters that are straight above the Milky Way, or to the west, or to the south, or east, or north, or down below. In every direction, we find clusters of galaxies expanding away from us. Reflecting on this bizarre information coming from the astronomers, the physicists concluded that the universe as a whole must have begun as a point that exploded in a titanic burst of energy. For not only are the galaxies expanding away from each other, they are moving away with a velocity related to the space in between them. The farther apart they are, the faster they're flying away. Galaxies that are twice as far apart are sailing away twice as fast from each other. The same holds throughout the entire universe. Galaxies that are 10 times as far apart sail away 10 times as fast. The mathematical conclusion could not be more startling. By tracing the trajectories of the superclusters of galaxies backwards in time, we find an event of cataclysmic energy where all trillion galaxies are brought into a single point, the birthplace of the universe. There, in that place, the entire cosmos began as a pinprick, a sextillion-ton pinprick layered with the power to thunder forth into this vast universe. This complex array, including the Magellanic Clouds, the Milky Way galaxy, Andromeda galaxy, with the local satellite galaxies, the 1,000 galaxies of the Virgo cluster, and all the superclusters that line the Great Wall, all of these are sailing off from initial birthplace. And each supercluster rushes away from every other supercluster, all of them emerging from a single point, the birthplace not only of the galaxies, but ultimately of ourselves, our bodies, our families, the sun, the moon, everything. The idea that the universe began in one place is certainly an ancient one in human history. Such images as a cosmic egg which cracks open at the beginning of time, gives birth to all the phenomena, these are found throughout the planet. Thus, the scientific discovery has a dual nature of being both old and new simultaneously. The overarching image of a cosmic birth is very ancient, but our ability to measure it physically is new. In 1965, Arno Penzias and Robert Wilson at Bell Labs captured some of the light from the beginning of time. And it's because of this that we can now say the birthplace of the universe is 15 billion light years away. The light they discovered originated in the primeval fireball and traveled 15 billion years to reach us. To trace these photons back to their origin 15 billion light years away is thus to follow the trail back to that sacred place where the universe first flared forth into existence. That place from which the photons left is the cosmic center, the world's navel, the sacred origin point of being. That is the place endowed with the stupendous fecundity necessary to give birth to an entire cosmos. In order to appreciate what this means, we have to go to a new level of understanding. I stated earlier that the galaxy clusters are moving away from us in all directions. What I did not point out then is the startling conclusion that in terms of the cosmic expansion, we find ourselves at the center. This is indeed a strange and most unexpected development. If such a discovery had been made during the medieval period of Europe, it would have caused no surprise, for the presiding worldview at that time put the Earth at the center of the universe. To extend Earth's centrality to the center of the expansion of the galaxies would have made no great demands on the medieval mind. But of course, when Hubble made this discovery, we no longer lived within the medieval worldview. We had already learned that the Earth is not a fixed point at the center of the universe. Earth is but one planet moving around a single star, which itself is one of 300 billion stars of the Milky Way, which in turn is one of 1 trillion galaxies of the entire universe. If we've learned anything over the last 400 years since Copernicus, we've certainly learned that the Earth is not a fixed center around which all the planets and stars revolve. And yet, here is this new revelation, placing us at the center of the cosmic expansion. What are we supposed to make of it? Hubble's discovery is not a contradiction of what Copernicus learned. Hubble's discovery of the expanding universe is instead the completion of the exploration that Copernicus started. Copernicus initiated an investigation of the universe that removed the Earth from the center of the universe. But after 400 years of empirical inquiry, a great reversal has taken place. Not one that takes us back to the cozy, medieval, geocentric world, but one that takes us out into an immense evolutionary cosmos, one centered on its own expansion. In order to fully appreciate this new understanding of the cosmic center, we must now deal with a paradox at the very heart of the data. I've presented two facts which seem in conflict with each other. First, in terms of the light from the beginning of time, which was first detected by Penzias and Wilson, the birthplace of the universe is 15 billion light years away from us. Second, in terms of the expansion of the galaxies, which is Hubble's discovery, we are at the very center of the expansion. We need to consider the strange situation where we are at the center of the cosmic expansion and 15 billion light years away from the origin of this expansion. How can we be both at the center and 15 billion light years away from the center? The central idea for understanding the nature of the universe's birth and development is that of omnicentricity. The large-scale structure of the universe is more complex either than the Earth-centered picture of the medieval cultures or the fixed three-dimensional Newtonian universe of modern culture. For we have discovered we are in a universe that is expanding and is centered upon itself at each place of its expansion. In this universe of ours, to be in existence is to be at the center of the cosmic expansion. I need to emphasize the fact of omnicentricity here. If there are intelligent and curious beings in the Hercules cluster of galaxies, 700 million light years away from us, and such creatures are pondering the universe from that perspective, they will also discover that the galaxies in the universe are moving away from them. They will thus conclude, on the basis of this evidence, that they are at the center of the universe's expansion, and they will be correct. We might conclude from this that there is no special place in the universe, or we might conclude that every place is equally special, for every place is that very place that gave birth to the world. In our struggle to understand, we sometimes wish the universe were not so complex. But the universe will be what it will be regardless whether we humans accept it for what it is or not. But as before, if we can begin to see the universe from its own perspective of omnicentricity, we can begin to inhabit the universe as it is. There's one image in the scientific literature that can give us some assistance in understanding an omnicentric universe. So imagine you're inside a loaf of raisin bread as it is being baked. We need to focus our imaginations on being in the very midst of the raisin bread. Forget about questions of the crust or the oven. For us, there's only the bread, and we're inside of it. In particular, imagine yourself on a raisin and just look around. All the other raisins are moving away from you as the bread bakes. So that in terms of the bread's expansion, you find yourself at the very center. And anyone else on any other raisin throughout the loaf would come to a similar conclusion. Hence, we have in the raisin loaf a model for an omnicentric reality. But there's more. Suppose you now try to determine whether or not you and your raisin are moving with respect to the bread itself. What you will find, of course, is that you're frozen in place, for your raisin sits stationary with respect to the surrounding bread. And when you think about it a bit, you realize that the very reason the raisins are moving away from you is because of the expansion of the bread. You and your raisin are not moving. It's the space in between the raisins that is growing larger. And that precisely is how we understand the cosmic expansion. Not as a movement of galaxies through an already fixed Newtonian space like an empty box. It's much more interesting. The cause of the expansion of the universe is the space that rushes into existence between the clusters of galaxies. This space that is rushing into existence results in the clusters rushing apart from each other. The actual size of each galaxy stays the same. It's the space in between that expands in each instant, which results in an ever larger universe. In terms of the large-scale expansion of the universe, we're basically stationary. We are at the stable and unmoving center of the expansion. For to be in this universe is to be at its center. The universe was born 15 billion years ago and expanded quickly so that ever new complex structures could emerge. 15 billion years into this epic story, humans emerged and began their own journey. The human journey, then, is a story within a story, for we have joined an already immensely complex and detailed drama, one that's been underway for billions of years. But we find ourselves at the very center of it. The universe began here in a titanic explosion of energy that complexified into us, into our living planet. The living Earth, then, is not at the edge of the universe, but at the very center of the story. If we are to understand the role of the human, we must begin with this sense of the whole. The universe is a developing story, and our own human venture finds its ultimate meaning in relationship to this enveloping drama. The moment we learn that the universe began 15 billion years ago in a blaze of energy, our minds began to wonder, where did all the energy come from? These minds of ours emerging 15 billion years after the great flaring forth, woven out of the same primal particles that emerged at the beginning. These minds of ours insist upon knowing what is at their foundation. We wish to know the nature of the ground from which we emerged, for then we'll know our own essential ground. Humans of every culture have contemplated the same mystery, and we in the 20th century now enter the cosmological lineage with our contribution. We too have contacted in our own way the great power that gave birth to the universe 15 billion years ago. We've touched in our own unique manner the great power that gives birth to every interaction throughout the universe today. From our empirical, mathematical, observational approach to the universe, we have identified a non-material realm suffusing not only the great macrocosm of the universe as a whole, but just as thoroughly the microcosm of the human and of every being of the earth and universe. The scientific name for this reality is the quantum vacuum. Discussions concerning the quantum vacuum sometimes point to the regions between the superclusters of galaxies as the best approximation to a pure vacuum, and this is a reasonable way to proceed. Certainly matter and energy are extremely rare in between the clusters. But the unfortunate consequence of speaking in these terms is to give the idea that the vacuum is somewhere far away, and this is simply not true. The vacuum is everywhere, and the place I want to refer to in discussing the vacuum is the space right in front of us. To bring home the idea, we can cup our hands together and reflect on what we are holding here. What are the contents cupped by my hands? First in size would be the molecules of air, the nitrogen, oxygen, carbon dioxide, and other gases. There are many, many, many millions of these, billions of these. If we imagine removing every one of these atoms and molecules, we would still be left holding the subatomic particles, such as neutrinos, that come from the sun. In addition, there would be radiation energy in the form of photons. So in order to get down to absolute nothingness, we would have to remove not only the atoms and all the subatomic particles, we would also have to remove each and every one of the particles of radiation. But now imagine we have done this, so that in our cupped hands there are no molecules left, and no particles, and no photons of light. All matter and radiation have been removed. No things are left, no objects, no stuff, no items that can be counted or measured. What remains is what we refer to as the vacuum, or emptiness, or pure space. Now the news. Careful investigation of this vacuum by quantum physicists in the 20th century reveals the strange appearance of elementary particles right in the midst of this emptiness. Even where there are no atoms and no other elementary particles, even when there are no protons and no photons of light, still, new elementary particles emerge. Particles simply foam into existence. I understand how bizarre and far-fetched this might sound to anyone learning it for the first time, but there's simply no way we can make this discovery reasonable. We have to understand that most of us have minds that have been shaped by modern educational process, which assumed the vacuum was a dead place. If a person insists the vacuum is dead, he'll have to find some way to keep himself ignorant of this deep discovery by the physicists, that particles emerge from the vacuum. I wish I could make the discovery easy to accept. But in fact, the particles do not sneak in from some hiding place when we're not looking, nor are they little bits of light energy that's been transformed into matter. Particles crop up out of the vacuum itself. That's the simple and awesome discovery of quantum physics. We find ourselves confronted by a universe where somehow being itself arises out of a field of emptiness. This emergence of particles out of a non-visible field takes place throughout the entire universe. The reason it took us so many millennia to discover this is the subtlety of the process. It takes place at a realm far more subtle than that which our eyes can detect. The usual process is for particles to erupt in pairs that will then quickly interact again and annihilate each other. Protons and antiprotons, for instance, they rush into existence and then annihilate. Such creative and destructive activity takes place everywhere and at all times in the universe. We've learned that the foundation of the universe is this mystery that can be called an empty fullness or a fecund nothingness. Even though this discovery may be difficult, if not impossible to visualize, we can nevertheless speak some basic truths concerning the very ground of the universe. Primarily, the base of the universe is not inert. It is not a dead, bottom-of-the-barrel kind of thing. The base of the universe boils with creativity, so much so that physicists refer to the universe's ground state as space-time foam. The true significance of the discovery of the quantum vacuum is the new understanding it provides concerning the reality of the non-visible world. I say non-visible rather than invisible, for many things are invisible to us and yet are capable of being seen. For instance, individual atoms are too small for the unassisted human eyesight to detect, but such atoms can be seen if they're magnified sufficiently. The non-visible, on the other hand, is that which can never be seen, because it is neither a material thing nor an energy constellation. In addition, the non-visible world's nature differs so radically from the material world that it cannot even be pictured. It's both non-visible and non-visualizable. Another phrase for pointing to this non-visible mystery at the base of being is the all-nourishing abyss. One advantage of this designation is its dual emphasis. The universe's generative potentiality is indicated with the phrase all-nourishing, but the universe's power of infinite absorption is indicated with the word abyss. In each instant, protons and antiprotons are emerging out of and are as suddenly absorbed back into the all-nourishing abyss. The all-nourishing abyss is not a thing, nor a collection of things, nor even a physical place. It is rather a power that gives birth and that absorbs existence at a thing's annihilation. At the base of the universe, then, is generative power. The root of each thing is this pure generativity. We're conditioned to think of each thing as consisting primarily of atoms and molecules, but this is not actually the case. In reality, if you took all the whirling elementary particles of your body and pressed them together until they touched, they would amount to something smaller than a grain of sand. Thus, the essential nature of any body is less material than it is empty space. From this quantum perspective, we can begin to appreciate that the essential nature of the human is the all-nourishing abyss. We are certainly composed of particles that form atoms and molecules, but our core nature, the ground of this structured being, is the realm of infinite fecundity. The human is the source of the creativity that pervades the universe. Creative action is the most natural thing a human can engage in. We need to emphasize the pervasive nature of this reality. The generativity of all-nourishing abyss is acting ceaselessly throughout the universe. Even in the darkest region, beyond the Great Wall of galaxies, even in the void between the superclusters, even in the gaps between the synapses of the neurons in our brains, there occurs an incessant foaming, a flashing flame, a shining forth from and a dissolving back into. Although our understanding is very young and thus inadequate in many ways, what we've discovered is already profoundly stirring. From our cosmological studies, we learn that we are at the center of the large-scale omnicentric expansion of the universe. From our quantum studies, we learn that matter and energy emerge from the quantum vacuum. Taken together, these two discoveries bring human understanding to a vista never before enjoyed. We exist rooted in that generativity that gave birth to the universe at the beginning of time. I'd like to turn to a specific person in order to illustrate this discussion. My hope is that if we can understand these ideas as they pertain to an actual human, we will have a better hold on how they shed light upon our own situations. So we turn now to Albert Einstein and the moment he discovered the expansion of the universe. As with all the major transformations of human consciousness, this discovery, of course, required the intelligent development of all 2 million years of human existence, a development that ended in a profound sensitivity to the news the universe brought to Earth. But the essential news surfaced for the first time in one particular human, our century's most celebrated scientist. The crucial period is the second decade of the 20th century in Berlin. So there he sits, this human, his frame bestowed upon him by the long line of primates in his past, and now held aloft 20 inches by rented furniture. A strange moment, certainly, and yet so much that was familiar too. His pipe leaning on its side, forgotten, the ashes dead now for an hour, the room heavy with the smell of the old smoke. Outside, it's raining still. The few people on the streets below are hurrying under caps and dark coats. But Einstein hasn't looked out the window all evening. And even if he did, the sensory images would hardly penetrate his consciousness. Not aware of the rain, or the dead pipe, or the color of his dark green pencil, yet profoundly aware, very alert, even heaven-laden with consciousness. A sort of consciousness that lives best near the edge of the world, a region he seemed to occupy so often. We need to reflect on Einstein as he sits at his desk, stunned by what has appeared on the white paper. To everyone alive at this time, his equations would appear to be just some letters and a few numbers scrawled across the page. But to Einstein, they revealed something unbelievable about the universe. Even though by this time he must have grown somewhat accustomed to the regularity with which shattering truths dropped from his fingertips, Einstein was stunned silent by what he was seeing. These symbols whispered something new. The universe is expanding in all directions. This was no minor modification. This was an idea that was radically new. If true, it would shatter the worldview of everyone, Einstein included. Psychological investigators later questioned Einstein about the origin of his ideas during such moments of radical creativity, and he stunned them with his reply. Instead of speaking of algebraic or geometric formalisms, Einstein said his experiences were of the muscular type. So there Einstein sat, thick with awareness, his hands pressing the mathematical symbols onto the page, and the Hercules cluster of galaxies was racing away from the Milky Way at 30,000 kilometers each second. The Coma cluster of galaxies, too, all trillions of stars, each 1,000,000 times the size of Earth, sailed silently into the cosmic night. And there was no awareness of this in the Earth's mental activities. But there sat Einstein at brood. 15 billion years earlier, the universe flared forth a stupendous energy, and every place in the universe was the unwobbling source of this primordial fire. Through the creativity pervading the cosmos, some of the first particles there at the beginning slowly baked into a piece of Earth that now sat meditating in the form of Einstein. Einstein eventually despaired of ever explaining his experience of creativity to others. He did not, he told them patiently, simply study data and then look for equations to fit the data. The truth of the matter, so difficult for them to accept, was that he himself relied primarily on the freedom of the imagination. When Einstein, this piece of the Milky Way galaxy, was asked what he sought, he answered, "I want to know how the old one thinks. The rest is a detail. This creature wearing worn-out shoes, this living flesh with its lifelong love of laughter, this vibrant concentration of molecules, this soul searing with wonder, burned to know how the old one thinks, how the old one is shaping the great vaults of the heavens, how the old one is casting 1,000,000,000 stars in their circlings, how the old one is fastening the atoms together, how the old one is releasing electromagnetism throughout the cellular membranes." Chock full with the very dynamics he sat contemplating, Einstein experienced a birth that permeated him whole, his mind, his muscles, his viscera, effortlessly. And as a form of these very dynamics, he jotted down the field equations. Rising out of all-nourishing abyss, this piece of the Milky Way jotted down the dynamics of the Milky Way. This region of space-time, rich with the interactions of the universe, jotted down the symbolic form of these very interactions of the universe. The Indians of South America teach that to become human, one must make room in oneself for the immensities of the universe. Unless we do so, we cannot find our true nature. We'll wander in pain and loneliness. We'll never learn how the old one thinks. Caught in fragments of our nature, we'll attach ourselves to one fragment after another, each one taking us further away from our center. Making room for the immensities, Einstein experienced their inrush, when suddenly the Milky Way, as great self, became this Einstein, reflecting upon his deepest nature, which is the nature of the cosmos too. In that great moment, in a state of consciousness coming from years of disciplined preparation, Einstein was not contemplating something apart from himself. He was absorbed in the experience of the feelings in his body, in his viscera, that were caused by the causes permeating the universe. That great power that had there, at the birthplace of the universe, gushed forth into all the energies and galaxies, was now bringing forth its own self-portrait in the symbols of Einstein's field equations. Powers that would one day receive such names as gravity, or the second law of thermodynamics. Powers that would one day be called the strong nuclear interaction. Powers that shape the Milky Way galaxy and the mammalian organisms. Those were the powers at work in that concentrated form of the Milky Way called Einstein. And it was there that the universe broke into a new contemplation of its sublime grandeur. But this story has a twist at its end. For though rising out of all-nourishing abyss was the startling new revelation of the universe's expansion, even Einstein could not handle it. After an internal struggle with himself, he backed away from what had surfaced in his own awareness. Can anyone wonder at the fact that Einstein rejected this truth? That he lost his nerve? That he altered the equations to hide their difficult truth? In all of this, he was only too human. For how many of us are capable of accepting all at once the full truth when it comes in the form of a knife? How many of us let it cut through our hold on a false version of reality without at first administering some edge blunting that will allow us to cling to one or two accustomed fictions? So Einstein doctored his equations. He added a term, now known as the cosmological constant. By altering the equations, he took away their secret story of the universe's expansion and thereby preserved his own attachment to an unchanging Newtonian universe. It was only these altered equations that he allowed out of his study. Perhaps he was confident no one would notice. Perhaps he was hoping everyone would view the equations as yet another straightforward contribution to the scientific canon. But as in those mythological stories, where to change even one word of a sacred chant throws the entire universe to its ruin, so too with Einstein's sacred code. For a while later in Russia, the mathematical cosmologist Alexander Friedman, when pondering Einstein's equations, made what for him was a startling discovery. If one worked with these Einstein equations just a bit, dropping off this one strange term, why, it turned out that Einstein's equations pointed to an expanding universe. So Friedman rushed off a letter to Einstein. And I only wish someone had snapped a photograph of Einstein's face when he folded open the letter from this excited young mathematician. Einstein thought he had put the whole business behind him, and now here it was, right back in his face. C.G. Jung's melancholic summation comes to mind. One finds one's destiny on the path one takes to avoid it. As it turned out, even Friedman's work failed to dislodge Einstein from his air. But in the next decade, Edwin Hubble in California trained his telescope on the distant galaxies and saw that they were in fact expanding away from us. Then in the 1920s, Hubble called up Einstein and said, "Al, I really think you should come down here and look for yourself." There at Mount Palomar, Einstein became convinced that the old idea of the universe as a fixed, unchanging place, the old idea that the universe was simply a giant box, was just false. Only when Einstein saw with his own eyes the galaxies expanding away from us did he realize that his original insight was in fact the truth. The universe was expanding. The universe had an edge to its existence, for the universe had a birthplace. And all of this had been predicted by his original equations. At the end of his life, when Einstein reflected on his career with its work at the highest level of genius through 5 decades of the 20th century, he called the doctoring of his field equations the greatest blunder of my scientific career. Science is one of the most careful and detailed methods by which the human mind came to grasp the fact of the universe's beginning. But the actual birthplace is not a scientific idea. The actual birthplace is where you live your life. Children in the 3rd millennium will begin their education learning that they live within the creative power that gave birth to the universe. They will learn that their own lives come out of this power and that their fulfillment and their well-being and their ultimate achievement depend directly upon their capacity to participate effectively with this creativity that suffuses the world. The religion of consumerism of the 20th century taught something different. Advertisements were designed to convince us that we should be unhappy with what we have and who we are. 30,000 times before they enter school, our children are told, until you own the right things, you're nothing. Instead of learning the way of gratitude for the great gift of existence, they learn the way of greed for an insatiable and deadly consumerism. But in the education of the next century, we will learn that we live rooted in the birthplace of the universe, and that each of us is the birthplace of the universe. A person enters her personal birthplace, that unique place where the universe once again gives birth to itself, this time and every time in a completely new way. To appropriate what we have learned about the all-nourishing abyss might seem to be a tremendous challenge, but it's easy enough to describe. The transformation consists in the recognition that the very consciousness that learns it is at the origin of the universe is itself an origin of the universe. The awareness that bubbles up each moment that we identify as ourselves is directly rooted in the originating activity of the universe. One begins then by identifying one's own ground with the originating activity pervading the universe. To do so is to become the birthplace of the universe in the form of a person. That which blossomed forth as cosmic egg 15 billion years ago now blossoms forth as oneself, as one's family, as one's community of living beings, as the blue planet, as an ocean of galaxy clusters. The same fecund source, then and now. The same numinous energy, then and now. To inhabit the universe is simply to live with an awareness that we are rooted in the primordial fire that gave birth to existence. The universe began with the flaring forth of light and matter. This birth took place at every point in the universe, including our place here. If the ground of the universe is a place of power, then our foundation is this place of power. If the ground of the universe is a realm of infinite creativity, then we are a realm of infinite creativity. And if the source of the universe is some kind of stupendous imagination, and it must surely be, for look at what has been imagined and what has come forth, then our source as well is this font of imaginative creativity. Beginning as pure energy, the universe complexified through a billion-year luminous process that transformed itself from primordial protons into the first atoms of hydrogen and helium. The spectacular transformation continued for billions of years and carried these atoms into the form of galaxies, and then into molecules and cells and people. We are energy that arose from the birthplace of the cosmos, and we come forth from and live now at a generative center of the universe.